The dust devil spun across the mesa like a ghost dancing in the afternoon heat, and Jake Morgan watched it from beneath the brim of his weathered hat. He'd been tracking a stray calf for the better part of 3 hours when he spotted something that made him rein in his sorrel mare so hard she nickered in protest. There, huddled behind a stand of creosote bushes, was a child. Jake dismounted slowly, his spurs jingling in the silence. The girl couldn't have been more than 7 years old, her dark hair matted with dust and thorns, her brown eyes wide with a fear that cut straight through his chest. She wore what had once been a calico dress, now torn and sun-faded to near white. Her feet were bare and bleeding. "Easy now," Jake said softly, the way he'd speak to a spooked horse. "I'm not going to hurt you." The girl didn't move, didn't speak. She just stared at him with those enormous eyes, and Jake felt something shift in his chest. He'd been alone on his ranch outside of Prescott for 5 years now, ever since consumption had taken his wife Mary. The silence of his life had become so familiar he'd stopped noticing it, but looking at this frightened child, he suddenly felt the weight of all those empty rooms in his house. "You speak English?" he asked. Still nothing. Jake tried the few Apache words he knew from trading with the scouts at Fort Whipple. "Shikai, friend." The girl's eyes flickered with recognition. She was Apache then. That complicated things considerably. It was 1886, and tensions were still running high. Geronimo had surrendered just months ago, and most of the Apache had been forced onto reservations or sent to Florida. Finding a lost Apache child in the territory was like finding a spark in a powder keg. Jake pulled his canteen from his saddle and held it out. The girl's eyes fixed on it with desperate hunger. She darted forward, snatched it from his hand, and drank so greedily that water spilled down her chin. When she finally lowered it, gasping, Jake saw the tracks of old tears through the dust on her face. "When did you last eat?" he asked, knowing she probably couldn't understand him but needing to fill the silence. He dug through his saddlebag and found some jerky and hardtack. The girl fell on it like a starving wolf cub. While she ate, Jake studied her. There were no obvious injuries beyond the cut feet and general exhaustion. But she'd been out here alone for days at least, maybe longer. How had she survived? Where had she come from? The nearest Apache reservation was over 100 miles south. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold, Jake made a decision that would change both their lives. He couldn't leave her out here. She'd die before morning, either from exposure or from the coyotes he could already hear beginning their evening chorus. "Come on," he said, gesturing to his horse. "Let's get you somewhere safe." The girl hesitated, her eyes darting between Jake and the endless desert. Whatever she was weighing in her mind, survival won out. She nodded once, sharp and decisive. Jake lifted her onto the mare, and she sat rigid as a board, clearly unused to horses. He swung up behind her and turned toward home, feeling the girl's small body trembling against his chest. By the time they reached his ranch house as twilight was deepening into night, she'd fallen asleep, her head lolling against his arm. The house felt different with another person in it. Jake heated water for a bath, found one of Mary's old nightgowns that he'd never had the heart to give away, and tried not to think too hard about what he was doing. He wasn't a father. He didn't know the first thing about raising a child, especially not an Apache child who didn't speak his language and had clearly been through some kind of trauma. When the girl was clean and fed and tucked into the bed in the spare room, Jake sat on his porch and smoked his pipe, staring out at the star-scattered sky. He should ride into Prescott tomorrow and report finding her. The marshal would know what to do, would probably send her to the reservation or to some mission school. That was the proper thing to do. But when morning came and Jake looked in on the sleeping child, saw her small hand curled under her cheek and the peaceful expression that had replaced yesterday's fear, he found himself making breakfast instead of saddling his horse. Then he found himself teaching her the English words for things around the ranch. Then a week had passed, and she was following him around like a shadow, learning to gather eggs and feed the chickens, her laugh like unexpected music when one of the hens pecked at her toes. He still didn't know her name. She hadn't spoken a single word in any language. But she was quick and clever, learning to anticipate what he needed before he asked, communicating with gestures and expressions that became their own private language. Jake started calling her little bird, because of the way she tilted her head when listening and moved with quick, precise movements. 3 months passed before the knock came on his door. Jake had just come in from mending fence, and Little Bird was kneading dough for biscuits, her small hands working the mixture with serious concentration. The knock made them both freeze. Through the window, Jake could see 2 Apache scouts from the fort, and with them, a woman. Even from this distance, even through the dusty glass, she took his breath away. She stood tall and proud, wearing a mixture of Apache and settler clothing, her long black hair braided with turquoise beads that caught the sunlight. Her face was striking, with high cheekbones and eyes that seemed to see straight through walls. Little Bird made a sound, the first sound Jake had heard from her beyond laughter. It was small and broken and full of longing. "Shima," she whispered. "Mother." The woman's name was Nalan, which the fort interpreter explained meant maiden, though there was nothing maiden-like about her. She was a widow, her husband killed during the conflicts that had ravaged the Apache people over the past decades. When she stepped into Jake's house and saw her daughter, the carefully controlled expression she'd worn cracked like a dam breaking. Little Bird ran to her, and Nalan dropped to her knees, pulling the child into her arms with a ferocity that made Jake look away, feeling like an intruder in his own home. The woman was crying, speaking rapid Apache that Jake couldn't follow, her hands running over her daughter's face and arms as if confirming she was real. The fort interpreter, a half-Apache man named Tom, explained what he knew. Nalan's small band had been attacked by raiders while traveling to join relatives on the reservation. In the chaos, her daughter had run into the desert and gotten lost. The band had searched for days but found no trace. They'd assumed the child was dead, taken by the desert or by animals. Nalan had been beside herself with grief, Tom said, barely eating or sleeping, spending weeks combing the territory until the scouts finally convinced her it was hopeless. Then a rancher mentioned to someone at the fort that he'd seen Jake Morgan in town with an Apache child, Tom continued. Word got around. The scouts brought Nalan straight here. Jake nodded slowly, watching mother and daughter cling to each other. He should feel relieved. The problem was solved. Little Bird had a home, a mother who loved her. That was the best possible outcome. So why did his chest feel hollow? Tell her, Jake said to Tom, his voice rougher than intended, tell her I'm glad the girls found her mother. Tell her she can stay here tonight, rest up before traveling. I've got room. Tom translated, and Nalan looked up at Jake for the first time, really looked at him. Her eyes were red from crying but sharp with intelligence and something else he couldn't quite read. She spoke, and Tom translated. She says you saved her daughter's life. She says there's no way to repay such a debt, but she'll try. She asks what kind of man takes in a lost Apache child when most would have left her to die or turned her over to the authorities to be shipped away. Just did what anyone would do, Jake muttered, uncomfortable with the intensity of her gaze. No, Nalan said in accented but clear English, surprising him. Not anyone. Most would not. The scouts left, promising to return in 2 days to escort Nalan and her daughter to the reservation. That night was strange and wonderful and painful all at once. Little Bird, whose real name was Kiona, seemed torn between her mother and Jake, running between them, chattering away in Apache now that her voice had been unlocked. The silence of Jake's house had been shattered completely, replaced by the sound of 2 female voices and laughter that bounced off walls that hadn't heard such sounds in years. Jake made a simple dinner of stew and cornbread. Nalan moved around his kitchen with the ease of someone used to making herself useful, helping without being asked. When their hands accidentally touched reaching for the same pot, Jake felt a jolt like touching a hot stove, and from the way Nalan's eyes widened, she'd felt it too. After dinner, with Kiona asleep in the spare room, Jake and Nalan sat on the porch. The night was cool, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. For a long time, they didn't speak, just sat listening to the coyotes and the wind through the cottonwoods by the creek. She talks about you, Nalan finally said. She showed me the eggs she learned to gather. The chickens you let her name. The horse she's learning to brush. She's a good kid, smart, quick learner. She was afraid of horses before. Afraid of many things. Nalan turned to look at him, and in the lamplight spilling from the window, her face was beautiful in a way that made Jake's throat tight. You gave her safety. Peace. These are gifts beyond measure. Jake shifted uncomfortably. Any decent person would have. Stop, Nalan interrupted. You don't see it, but I do. You didn't just keep her alive. You made her happy. She laughs again. I heard her laughing, and I thought my heart would break because I never thought I'd hear that sound again. The weight of her gratitude sat heavy on Jake's shoulders. Where will you go? The reservation. Nayland's expression darkened. I have no choice. There's nowhere else for our people now. The old ways are gone. She said it matter-of-factly, but Jake heard the grief underneath. What was your husband like? He asked, then immediately regretted it. Sorry. That's not my business. He was a good man. A warrior. He died fighting for our freedom. She paused. But he has been gone 3 years now. Sometimes I can barely remember his face. Does that make me a terrible person? No, Jake said quietly. It makes you human. My Mary's been gone 5 years. Some days I can't remember the sound of her voice, and I feel guilty as sin about it. They sat in silence again, but it was different now. Companionable. Understanding. Over the next 2 days, Jake watched Nayland with her daughter, and something in his chest ached with wanting. Not just wanting Nayland, though he'd be lying if he said she didn't affect him. But wanting this, the fullness of his house, the sounds of family, the way Kiona ran to show him things, and Nayland smiled when their eyes met across the room. On the morning the scouts were supposed to return, Jake woke early and found Nayland already up, sitting at his kitchen table with coffee she'd made. The sun hadn't risen yet, and in the pre-dawn darkness, she looked ethereal. I can't go, she said without preamble. Jake's heart stuttered. What? To the reservation. I can't take Kiona there. You've seen how she is here. Happy. Learning. Growing. On the reservation. She shook her head. There's no future there. Just survival. Barely. What are you saying? Nayland met his eyes. I'm saying I want to stay here, if you'll have us. The words hung in the air between them like something fragile and precious. Jake stared at Nayland, his mind racing. What she was suggesting was complicated in ways he could barely begin to untangle. A white rancher living with an Apache widow and her daughter, unmarried, in 1886 Arizona territory. The townspeople would talk. Some would do more than talk. You understand what people would say, Jake started carefully. I understand that my daughter is alive because of you. I understand that she's happy here. I understand that I have no other options that don't end with her in a mission school or dying slowly on the reservation. Nayland's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly around her coffee cup. And I understand that you're lonely. This house is lonely. We could help each other. How would it work? I could work for you. As a housekeeper. You need one, clearly. She gestured at the general bachelor state of his home. I can cook, clean, mend. I know horses and cattle from my childhood, before everything changed. I could help with the ranch work too. You'd pay me wages like any other employee. Everything proper. Jake wanted to laugh at the idea of them living under the same roof being proper, but he understood what she meant. The appearance of propriety, at least. A business arrangement that no one could fault, even if they'd whisper about it anyway. The scouts are coming today, he said. Then we tell them Kiona wants to stay with you and I'm staying to care for her. We tell them I'm working for you. It's not so unusual. Plenty of Apache women work for white families now. And if someone causes trouble. Nayland's eyes flashed. Then we deal with it. I'm not afraid of trouble, Jake Morgan. I'm afraid of watching my daughter lose the light in her eyes. When the scouts arrived, Jake and Nayland presented a united front. Tom the interpreter looked skeptical, the Apache scouts unreadable, but after talking with Kiona and seeing how the child clung to both Jake and Nayland, they reluctantly agreed to report back to the fort that the situation was resolved. The child was safe and cared for. That was what mattered. The first months were an adjustment. Jake gave Nayland and Kiona the larger bedroom and moved himself into what had been his storage room. Nayland transformed the house in ways both practical and beautiful, hanging herbs to dry, bringing in wildflowers, creating small touches that made the space feel like a home instead of just a structure. She sewed curtains from flour sacks and taught Kiona to read using Jake's old books, her English improving daily. The three of them fell into rhythms. Jake and Nayland worked the ranch together during the day, and he was continually surprised by her strength and knowledge. She could rope a calf, doctor a sick cow, and break a green horse with skills she'd learned before the wars had disrupted her people's way of life. In the evenings, they'd teach each other their languages. Jake learned Apache words and phrases. Nayland and Kiona polished their English. They'd play cards or checkers, and Kiona would practice writing her letters. The townspeople did talk, as predicted. Some refused to do business with Jake. Others made crude suggestions he ignored. But he also found unexpected allies. Old Widow Harrison brought by preserves and told anyone who'd listen that Jake was doing a Christian thing. The pastor, surprisingly, defended them from his pulpit, talking about good Samaritans and caring for the lost. Even the marshal, after riding out to check on the situation, gave his grudging approval. The real problem wasn't the town. It was the feeling growing between Jake and Nayland, the way his heart would jump when she laughed, the way she'd blush when their hands touched, the charged silence that would fall when they found themselves alone. They were scrupulously proper, never alone in the house without Kiona awake, never touching more than necessary, but the attraction was there, building like a summer storm. It came to a head 6 months after they'd made their arrangement. Jake was working on fixing the barn roof when he missed his footing and fell 15 feet onto hard-packed earth. He woke to Nayland's face above his, tears streaming down her cheeks, her hands checking him for broken bones with professional efficiency. "Don't you dare die," she was saying, half in English, half in Apache. "Don't you dare leave us. Takes more than a fall to kill me," Jake managed, though his head was spinning and his ribs felt cracked. Nayland helped him into the house, and for the next 3 days, she nursed him with a tenderness that went beyond duty. She sat by his bed at night, held water to his lips, changed the cold compresses on his bruises. And on the 3rd night, when he woke from a nightmare about being alone again, her hand was in his. "Nayland," he whispered. "I know," she said. "I feel it too. It's complicated. Everything is complicated. Life is complicated. But this," she squeezed his hand, "this feels simple." Jake knew what he wanted to say, what he'd been wanting to say for months. "Marry me." She went very still. "Jake, I know it's fast. I know people will talk even more than they already do. I know there are 1,000 reasons why it's a bad idea. But I love you. I love Kiona. I want this to be real, not just an arrangement. I want to wake up every day and know you're choosing to be here, not because you have nowhere else to go, but because you want to be." Nayland was quiet for so long Jake thought he'd ruined everything. Then she smiled, and it was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "In my people's way, we're already married. We've built a life together, shared our home, raised a child together. The ceremony is just words. But yes, I'll marry you in your way too, if that's what you need." They were married a month later by the pastor, with Widow Harrison and the marshal as witnesses. Kiona stood between them, holding both their hands, grinning so wide Jake thought her face might split. The town gossips had a field day, but Jake found he didn't care. He had everything that mattered. The years that followed weren't easy. They faced prejudice and challenges, struggled with drought and cattle disease, weathered threats from those who couldn't accept their family. But they faced it together. Nayland proved to be not just a capable ranch hand but a brilliant manager, modernizing their operations and negotiating deals that doubled their profits. Kiona grew into a confident young woman who spoke 3 languages and could outride any cowboy in the territory. Jake would sometimes sit on his porch at sunset, watching Nayland teach Kiona to weave in the Apache way, preserving traditions that could have been lost, and marvel at how a single dusty afternoon had changed everything. He'd gone looking for a stray calf and found a family. Instead, Nayland would catch him watching and smile, that slow smile that still made his heart race after all these years. She'd set down her weaving and come sit beside him, fitting against his side like she'd always belonged there. "What are you thinking?" she'd ask. "That I'm the luckiest man alive," he'd answer. And it was true. Against all odds, despite everything working against them, they'd built something beautiful. A home. A family. A love that transcended the boundaries others tried to impose. On their 10th anniversary, Kiona gave them a painting she'd made, the 3 of them standing together in front of the ranch house, the Arizona sunset blazing behind them. At the bottom, she'd written in both English and Apache, "Family is not found, it's made." Jake hung it over the fireplace, where it remained for the rest of their lives, a testament to an impossible love that had somehow become the realest thing any of them had ever known.